Okay, so now that we've covered cellular respiration, or how cells harvest energy, and photosynthesis, how cells make energy through that pathway, the pathway of photosynthesis, we want to take a little bit of a deviation and look at this idea of biofuels. So the production of biofuels. Odds are everybody reading this lecture or listening to it, you're using gasoline in your car, and most of us are probably using a 10% ethanol blend. Well, that ethanol is a biofuel produced from corn, can also be produced from soybeans, produced from sugar cane, and then we'll also talk about some other alternatives throughout the course of the lecture. What we want to start thinking about, especially for bio majors, is all of the different options for alternative fuel sources. Fossil fuels will continue to decrease in availability, even though we're finding new ways of extracting oils and gases and trying to maximize the usage of what we have. They are a limited resource. The bottom line is there's only so much coal, oil, natural gas, etc. on the planet. So if we can work towards developing biofuels that are renewable resources, things that can continuously be produced, we can extend the lifespan of how long we'll have coal around for, and oil and natural gas, and etc. So the idea here is not to say eliminate gasoline, eliminate oil, eliminate coal, etc. It's to supplement and diversify the sources of fuel, so that way we're not so dependent upon one source. There's lots of biological reasons, ecological reasons, financial reasons, social, political, etc. to explore the field of biofuels. Some fantastic opportunities are present for bio majors right at University of Illinois in Champaign if you have an interest in this type of research, looking at what are the new sources of fuels, things like that. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the pros and the cons of the different things that are commonly used as a source of biofuel. So corn. In the United States, especially in Illinois and the Midwest, we grow thousands and tens of thousands of acres of corn. A lot of that corn goes to feed animals, and then we consume the animals, primarily beef, some pork, chicken, etc. But a portion of that corn grown is diverted over to making fuel, to making ethanol. So there's some great opportunities here for farmers. There's a market. That way you're always going to be able to sell your corn. Now the challenge is that market price is controlled by outside entities, not the farming industry. But you're always going to have a market for your corn to be turned into biofuels. It's just, is it a large enough market to require large amounts of corn? Is that the best use for corn? Debatable topics, things well beyond the scope of this lecture that we're talking about here. Advantages, though, of biofuels: they often produce significant lower greenhouse gas emissions when they are burned. So we'll do some numbers later on as we go through all the different options. We'll put up a chart, we'll start filling in the numbers, take a look at what we have there for biofuels and what is the most viable source of biofuel for us in the Midwest. That may be different than what we might promote if we're out west or the southeast United States, etc. So it may vary regionally based upon your availability of what type of plants you can grow. What are the environmental and financial impacts of those plants? Okay, so corn, big one in the U.S. If we look at Brazil, Brazil is almost completely moved over to biofuels using sugar cane to power their industry and their cars and the source of energy that they use. So Brazil, great environment. It's tropical, great climate, the right ecosystem. They can grow sugar cane very easily, harvest it. It's a renewable plant. They can continue to produce it, convert that over into biofuels. And Brazil has been using biofuels heavily for several decades now. I mean, they really don't use a lot of fossil fuels, oil, coal, things like that, because they are doing so well with sugarcane and the conversion of that into a biofuel. So the challenge is, in the U.S., we can't grow sugarcane in Illinois. It's not the right environment. You think about photosynthesis and that pathway and what it takes for a plant to produce cellulose or glucose or any of the carbohydrates. Those plants would not survive in Illinois or the Midwest. Now, it might be viable to explore that option in Louisiana, in Florida, in states that have a similar climate or ecosystem that is similar to that of Brazil. Might be something to consider. Again, the idea is not everybody has to do the same thing. Even in the U.S., it's what is best and most beneficial environmentally, beneficial financially, and realistic to do in your given area. So sugarcane's a great option. Again, we'll look at the numbers as we get into the chart at the end of the lecture here. Canola. Germany uses canola. That's this plant here with the yellow flowers. Large amounts of canola are grown, harvested, and converted over into biofuel. Actually, it's biodiesel. So they're using that, doing very well, very successful with trying to wean away from fossil fuels with their canola biodiesel fuel. U.S., our kind of comparable version is taking soybeans and converting soybeans over into a fuel source. So the whole idea of taking the plant product and converting it, that's fermentation. That's the whole fermentation lecture we covered in the earlier lectures. Take a source of sugar, break it down. As you break it down in the anaerobic environment, that is converting it into alcohol. That's the alcohol that we're burning as ethanol, as biodiesel, as any of these biofuels or ethanol fuel-based products is produced through fermentation. Now the challenge is getting the product, usually it's cellulose or the plant-based carbohydrate, breaking that down efficiently. That's where the biggest challenge comes, and that's where understanding pathways and which enzymes are necessary, that's the key to biofuels. Can we figure out what enzymes and maybe even what organisms, bacteria, yeast, etc., are needed to break those bonds to take the cellulose or the starch or whatever it is, break it down into glucose to then make it usable as a biofuel, to allow that production of ethanol to form in the anaerobic environment. Okay, so again, canola is an option Germany's working with. Our comparable version is the soybeans in the United States. So, okay, now here is the area of opportunity. So corn does well. Ethanol from corn, from those plant products. Sugarcane in Brazil, biodiesel in Germany, or soybeans in the U.S. are all doing well. But what is being researched and looked into is, what can we do with grasses? Stuff called switchgrass. What about wood chips? Think about the massive mounds and mounds of bark wood chips that are produced from sawmills or from processing trees into lumber. A lot of that is just discarded or ground up into mulch, or whatever is done with it is considered to some extent a waste product. Would it be possible to find the right enzyme, the right organism, again, bacteria, fungi, maybe it's a protista out there that we don't know about or that we're not sure how it works, but the right pathway to breaking down that cellulose and getting it to ferment to produce ethanol. All right, so think about the environmental benefits here. If you planted 100 acres, or let's expand it out and go 1,000 acres of grass, you plant it once. You don't have to replant it year after year after year. Sometimes you can bale that grass 2 or 3 times in the course of one summer, one growing season in central Illinois. Where I live, we have some ground that has grasses on it, alfalfa and clover. The farmer has baled it 3 times this summer and into early fall here. So every time he's baling it, that grass could be taken and used to produce fuel if we understand and know what is the correct pathway and what is the right organism / enzymes to get it to ferment correctly. So huge advantage if we can explore this grass scenario. You plant the seed once, it grows, and you just cut it and bale it, and then you cut it and bale it. You're not ripping up the ground every time. You're not putting heavy amounts of pesticides or herbicides onto the ground. You don't need to worry about nearly as much, if any, fertilization of the ground, where with corn and soybeans we're putting down different fertilizers that often run off into nearby waterways. So huge environmental benefits and financial benefits. Plant the grass once, you never need to plant it again. It keeps growing and keeps growing and keeps growing. Maybe you go out and spot plant areas that maybe didn't survive, but it's a little different than when you're spending tens of thousands of dollars a year on corn seed or on bean seed and then fertilizer, and you got to go in and think about the whole process of farming. Till the ground, fertilize the ground, plant the seeds, spray the plants, harvest the plants, till the ground again. You're going back and forth over your field multiple times just to get one crop, to harvest that corn once or those soybeans once. A lot of fuel, a lot of time, a lot of expense. Biofuels, if we can get switchgrass, especially grasses, to be more productive, or to be productive in general, you're going to need to plant your field once. You go in and you cut and bale, and every time you harvest, that's going to make you money because you can convert that into fuel. The discarded wood chips, and that's being explored. Trees are pruned in Springfield every year. They go along the power lines and cut down all those branches and trees to keep them from possibly coming down and knocking down a power line. A lot of that wood material is just simply ground up and left to rot or sold for mulch. So you can go up to different places and buy mulch that's ground up, the old ground up trees that were pruned out from the power lines. Good use for it, but could it be used to make fuel, to be converted into fuel? That's the areas of research that are so open right now. Finding the correct pathway, the correct enzymes, the correct organism to do the fermentation, and what kind of yield will this produce. That is the key. Okay, so in the next lecture, we're going to break down the general process, a little bit how it's done, and then we'll look at the return for the investment and what comes out of the biofuel production process, what type of energy goes in, energy comes out, estimate prices, things like that. Okay, so let's check out the second biofuel lecture for that information.